That guy.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Tea with Doug G. If you don't know me, my name is Doug Gooden. And y'all, I am so excited this week to have my incredible guest, Mr. George Contini, on. George, thank you so much for being on the show. Why don't you take just a second, tell the folks who you are, what you do, all that jazz. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Doug, for having me on the show. And what can I say? But I am a colleague of Doug Gooden's, and that's really all that needs to be said. But past that, for those of you listening, I teach at University of Georgia in the Department of Theater and Film Studies, and that's where I met Doug. And I'm the head of the performance area there, and I teach a wide range of courses, including all the acting courses and dramatic writing, and I teach a queer theater and history class. And so I have a nice, and I'll soon be doing a musical theater history in the fall. So I got a big range of stuff. And I'm a professional actor and director, and work around the Atlanta area when I can.
Yes, and he's just phenomenal. Outside of that, he also co-owns and operates his own farm with your wonderful husband Anthony. Yeah. If you don't know George is amazing. Also, George, real quick sidebar. I didn't tell you this was going to happen, but just a quick little nugget of information. So you were one of the first two professors for the department I ever met.
Yes.
And I thought that do you know what cemented me like majoring in theater? So I performed in front of you and Dr. Saltz this terrible skit. Good Lord, it was horrible. It was atrocious.
I vividly remember it. I remember it.
Well, George, you laughed at it, and I said, I got someone to laugh. I'm gonna major in it. Let's do it. Granted, it was most likely a pity laugh, but hey, it's okay.
No.
It's all good. I will take what I can get.
No, if I laugh out loud, it's mostly a sincere. I would say, it's either a panic laugh. Definitely, I know the situation. It was not a panic laugh. So I'm sure I sincerely laughed because it was funny.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that you thought it was funny. But yeah, I mean, without further ado, George, let's get right into these questions. Okay.
Oh man, I'm blown away by these questions. Okay.
They are some quality questions. So first things first, we're not going to talk about anything theater related for the first question. So George, over quarantine, I know that y'all managed to grow a very large squash over the course of the quarantine or a year beforehand. So George, Rachel Witzel wants to know, A, do you still have the squash? B, do you have a picture of the squash? And C, could you just describe this squash for everyone to...
I can actually do better than that. Anthony has just left the room, and he is bringing the actual squash back.
I was hoping this would happen. Yes.
Here it comes. Here it comes. Here's the squash. It's coming. It is coming. It's still coming. Oh my gosh, it's still coming. It's going out the other side. That is, we just don't have one of them. We have multitudes of those, and they grow. They're called Trombocina squash, and like a trombone. And they you actually have to put them on a panel so that when they grow, they hang. And so imagine that thing you just saw, like hanging above you, like from the branches of a tree, but like a whole row of them. So you have to walk them. They're very odd. They're delicious. They are delicious.
Well, George, that played out the best way it possibly could have. But yeah, I saw Rachel post that question. I was like, thank goodness somebody else wanted to see the squash again. Um, but yeah. So like we talked about earlier, you are a man of many talents in the theater world, and one of the primary ways that like you and I have interacted over the course that I've been in school is you being my professor. So Ben Tankersley wants to know, how has your teaching style really changed and shifted in light of this pandemic that we're living in?
Oh man, that's such a deep question, Ben. I mean, my teaching style overall, I don't think has changed. I think, uh, uh, and I know that because I am exhausted at the end of teaching online. And it feels just like I would feel if I was teaching in person. I think the manner in which we're all ingesting and digesting information is what's so different. And I I think the thing, I'm going to go with the positive. I think the positive for me has been, in an odd way, I feel much more intimate with my students in these classes this semester than I've ever felt. And I feel part of that is because we all know how crazy it is. And I mean, and you and I talked about beforehand about, internet going down and all that we all, everybody, students and teachers, if you're at all human, had to let their guard down because of all this. And so we've let you into aspects of our lives. We've let you into our homes. You've let us to your homes. And there's, I'm very grateful that students have been willing to do that, and my fellow, my colleagues have been willing to do that, because that's a tough thing to do. And I feel much closer in an odd way to students that I normally would. And I have definitely changed things. I mean, and I've tried to capitalize on that. I mean, even with if anyone, Rachel, I know, is sent in a question, people in my 2500 class, in the theater and discipline class, I mean, one of the things I did was I took the time during the semester to meet individually with each of them over Zoom, because I felt like if I didn't do that, I was that there actually was a blessing in the fact that I'd be eye to eye and talk to someone and focus on them for a while. So I've been trying to find the positive in this craziness.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it completely makes sense. And I'm glad you brought up, like, like you and your colleagues across the board. I mean, the entire department has had to kind of shift the way that it moves and operates and everything like that. And I know one of the ways that y'all have really shifted is in the way that performances are done, and then also in the way that the grad students, how they do their thesis pieces, things like that. And I know that as a director, I know that from the directors in the department who I've spoken with, I know y'all have really had to kind of stretch and figure out new and different ways to do things, which brings me into this next question of, if there was a show that you think fits perfectly and could be staged perfectly in this COVID era that we are living in, what is that show that you would like to direct in a pandemic world?
Oh man. Well, I actually just did it. I mean, the show I've wanted to direct all my life.
I was kind of hoping this would be the one.
Happy Days has always been a show that's deeply resonated for me, and I always have wanted to direct it. And having the chance to have an actress like Robin take on that role and work through it with her, I mean, I learned so much, and it really did. The way that it mirrored what we were all feeling during the pandemic was, there were just days that I would just be gobsmacked. I'd just be like, wow, this play is speaking exactly to how we all feel right now. And so yeah, that kind of is like the penultimate pandemic play for me. And I'm going to stick with that one. I'm going to stick with that one, Doug.
I think it's a solid answer. It was also a really phenomenal performance.
She was amazing.
Yeah, it was great. Honestly, all the grad students, their thesis roles have been very, very entertaining, very just amazing to watch. So kind of keeping on this track of like how people have had to shift and things of that nature. So Hanson Harden sent in this really great question that struck me to my core. So, I mean, you know, I think one of the biggest words throughout this pandemic has been compromise, like knowing when to compromise, what battles you're going to fight, what battles you're going to take a seat on. And Hanson wanted to know, when is it okay in the field of theater? When is it okay to compromise yourself, your art, your career? You know, I'm just gonna give you that.
Hanson has been pursuing this question in so many of the classes I've had them in. So okay, this is such a difficult question, but I will, and I don't want to sound like I'm copping out. First of all, I'll say the standard answer, and that is, it's a personal issue for everybody, because we all have our own definition of what compromise is going to mean for us. So that might mean, you know, that I'm doing a movie that is subsidized by the oil industry, and do I feel like that's a bad thing? Or I'm playing a character that might be seen as being stereotypical, or some old worn out trope, but I'm getting paid a lot of money. I think that it's a question that everyone has to struggle with. You know, I can definitely say from my own experience, there have been times in my life that I have walked away from jobs, that I've been involved in jobs that, and it was less, this is really interesting. And it was less for me about necessarily, the compromise wasn't about whether, it wasn't a political thing. It wasn't necessarily like, oh, this play is dealing with unethical. It was quality. Like the times that I've actually quit a production, and I think there have been only 2 times in my life that I've actually quit a production that I was involved with. Once as an actor, as a director, and they both had to do with, I couldn't compromise my level of quality. I couldn't. The production quality was so bad. It was so disorganized. The people, either the artistic staff or the other people involved, were at such a low level of commitment that I just couldn't buy into it. And so I just kind of was like, no, I'm out of here. So I think everybody's their own sense of compromise is going to be a little different. You know, trying to cop out, but that's the best I could do.
I don't think it's necessarily a cop out. I mean, I think that's a fair point. However, kind of feeding off of that, you know, I mean, clearly you've been around for you've been in the business for a hot minute.
Yeah,
that started to come out way worse than I meant it to. But I mean, anyway, I mean, you've got a lot of experience in a lot of different fields, and one of the questions that we got is what is something that you know now at this stage of your career that you wish you knew at the beginning? And I'll also tack onto that the question that Amberly Harris threw in, which isn't even a question. She would just like to hear some embarrassing stories of you early on in your career.
Okay. Let's go with the first question first.
Yeah.
I, if and this sounds so egotistical. What do I wish I knew then that I know now? I cute. I wish I knew. I look back on my headshots from when I look at production photos and I'm like, who is that attractive, adorable guy? And my whole life, I have dealt with such a low sense of self-worth. And I wish that someone had said to me, George, you're cute. And back in the day, back in those days, agents were cruel. And I remember interviewing for when I was first looking for agents, and I interviewed with this one agent. She had seen me in a show and she called me in for an interview, and I went to her office, and the first thing out of her mouth was she said, "You're going to need to lose 25 pounds." And I was like, wow, okay, you just shot me in the core of who I am and made me feel so crappy about myself. I don't want to work with you, but that was what there was such a standard that things are shifting. They're shifting slowly, but things are definitely shifting in terms of what is the standard of beauty and looks and all that in the industry. We're definitely getting a much more diverse look. Obviously, we have a long way to go, but I mean, it was cruel. It was a cruel time. So yeah, I just wish I knew how cute.
Hey, look, here on Tea with Doug G, we are all about self-love. Because especially I feel like in this industry, like so often, like I mean, you're forced to hold a mirror up to yourself, and whether it's pointing out the reasons about yourself that you're not getting hired for a certain job, or pointing out the reasons why you only get hired for certain jobs. I mean, yeah, I mean, body image and just like acceptance of like the way that you look is so huge in life in general. But I mean, it's brutal in the entertainment industry.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in some. I mean, well, here, I mean, this will give you an example, and this will go in line with Amberly's question. It's a short story, but it ties into that previous thing. I remember going to this audition for oh my God, what was it for? Oh my God, I can't even remember. What we had to do had nothing to do with what the product was.
Was it the volleyball?
Oh no. This is something totally different. This was a commercial I did not get, and I was so happy because I went to the audition. We had to show up at this pool in a bathing suit. And that was all we were told. And we at the pool, and there was the director of the commercial was sitting in a pool deck chair in a bathing suit, sunning himself, all greased up, sunning himself with like a Mai Tai, sipping this huge drink. And he would just, all of us auditioning had to stand in a line in the gate by the pool, and they would let us in one at a time. And this guy would say, okay, next. And you had to come in, and there was a floaty in the middle of the pool. This inflatable, it was like an inflatable horse or something like that. And all we had to do was get in the pool and have difficulty getting on the horse and like have to wrestle this floaty horse. And it was just supposed to be the sight gag. Like it was something like, here was a person who had trouble doing things kind of thing. But this guy it was very clear that they had called us all in because the men were either chubby or quite large. And he would bring in these guys, and the guys who were really big, he would sit there and yell the most horrendous things at them while they were in the pool. And I literally stood, I had finished my audition, and I walked out and I saw him like yelling, hey, you fat ass, and you look ridiculous. And I literally started crying. I was like, this is a horrible business I am in. Why am I in this business? So this kind of goes back to Hudson's question of, that was a moment of like, I remember standing going, even if they offered me this commercial, I don't think I could take it to work with this man because he's so awful. Like what he just did to all of us auditioning for that commercial was one of the most inhumane, horrible situations I'd ever been in my life. And so it's kind of like, I think, and gosh, we'll do the circular thing, going back to what do I wish I knew then. I mean, I wish I knew in the beginning, having the strength and the fortitude to be able to stop people and say, like, and point them out right then and there and be like, even if this is going to lose me this job, you need to know that what you just said to that guy was just totally inappropriate and wrong. And I'm leaving now, to be able to have that kind of confidence, which I see wonderfully in so many young people today that I didn't see there before. I think people have a much more stronger social sense of social justice and a social consciousness in the young people that I teach. So I have hopes that less and less of that kind of action will be allowed to happen.
Yeah, I first of all, that's awful, that experience you describe. But yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. Where people are just people are more willing, I think, to stand up for themselves. Nowadays. Yeah. Excellent answer, George. Okay, so kind of taking a shift, because we got a lot of questions about theater, but then we also got a lot of questions about farming and things of that nature. And because I'm terrible at transitions, this is my transition.
Okay.
So first of all, just by and large, how long have y'all had your farm? What made you get into like farming? Like, what was the driving force?
The driving force was hooking up with this guy who's sitting over here in the corner right there. Honestly, really, Doug, had you been 20 years ago when I moved to Georgia that I would be living on a pig farm, I would have laughed in your face. I would have said, "You are crazy. You are a crazy." Because I truly, it's the last place in the world I expected to be. And so, I met Anthony, how many years now? 14 years? 14 years ago. And, at that point, his mom and dad lived on this farm. It was their family farm. It's where he grew up. And then he was starting to raise pigs at that time when I first started seeing him. And when we first moved in together, we lived at another house, and he would drive in, and I was really very fairly removed from the farm. I lived in that house, and he came here to work because his parents still lived here. And then we live right off of the fairly new Sugarloaf Parkway off of 316 in Lawrenceville. And about 10 years ago, they that was going to be built. And so they did the eminent domain thing and took a big chunk of his parents' farm, and they said, well, we don't want to live there anymore if it's going to be next to this road. And Anthony and I said, well, we'd live there. And so that moved us onto the farm. And so it's still his parents' farm. But he's been a farmer all his life. Since
1995.
Oh, he's saying that.
Since 1995. That's when I became a farmer.
And he used to do he was the radish king. He used to sell radishes at farmers markets, and he branched out from radishes to the pigs, and then along the way, of course, he's an amazing farmer, gardener. And so our garden is mostly for us. It's not really to sell. Every once in a while, we have something that we have a ton of. He will be like, sure, but let's sell some of that. But it's mostly for us. I think that's answering your question.
Yeah, no, it hit the answer right on the head. But okay, so there is one thing. So correct me if I'm wrong. Y'all grow your own pimento peppers, correct?
This question cracked us up. I'll let Anthony take over from here. Hold on.
I would not say that we don't grow our own pimentos. Pimento is a very specific pepper, and it's a pepper that it has been roasted and the skin has been removed. Occasionally I'll do that, but really I usually get my pimentos out of a jar. Sorry to say.
Well,
but
go ahead.
He did have an amazing pepper crop this year, and he's been making all sorts of different pepper relish and I'm not a big fermentation person. I don't like.
That's fair.
But he loves.
That's totally fair.
It. Like the kimchi thing, he loves that. No. But he's been doing a lot of fermenting of peppers, and he made pepper relish and the pickled peppers and all that, which we love. So.
Yeah. So kind of going off of that. So I have two questions to kind of wrap up our farm segment. So my mother, Miss Heidi Gooden, who's been active in the chat, she was wanting to know, what is your favorite thing that y'all do grow / what is your favorite recipe that y'all make based on what you grow at the farm?
Okay, so this question really, Heidi, this is a good question because it really got us to stop and be like, what do we like? So we came up with a few. I make this really mean collard green gratin that is in like this cheesy, like goat cheesy sauce with bacon on top. And so everything that we make it out of usually comes from the farm. And that's one of our favorite things. I love Anthony can roast a pork like nobody's business. And we have like he's made different we make a blueberry that we call bluebecue sauce that we put on the pork roast that is like mwah. Anthony makes this amazing pork liver pate that is wrapped in bacon and cooked in the oven, and has a boiled egg in the middle of it. So when you cut through it, it's, oh my God. That's so good. We have lots of blueberries every year, so I make lots of things with blueberries. Anything with blueberries is wonderful. Like we mentioned, we talked beforehand, before we started, we had a duck on Thanksgiving, and that was a first. So that was really exciting. And then, yes, he was grown here on the farm. And then out in the forest right behind our house, Anthony goes chanterelle mushroom foraging, and those chanterelles are pretty amazing as well. Yeah.
George, just so you know, I've royally screwed up by not eating dinner before the show. Good Lord, George.
We have to say, I mean, this and it's one of the few things about living on the farm is like sometimes we'll be eating dinner and we'll just look across the table at each other and we'll be like, who eats like this? Like who eats like this? This is like an amazing meal that we're having right now. So we're very grateful. And I think that's one of the things people have to understand. You know, we're very, very grateful of growing for Anthony and raising the animals for Anthony is a very spiritual thing. And so we're very grateful for the bounty when it's there. And it means a lot. So yeah, we appreciate that.
Yeah. So, okay. So I have one last question and we'll bookend our farm segment. Okay, so there's been this really big trend recently of this farm to table cuisine movement. Like that's the hip couture thing to do. And it was worded really well in the email that I sent you, but I'm trying to figure out what the actual wording was. So I mean, as someone who co-owns and operates their own farm, I mean, do you think that that's really such a novel idea that's kind of flooded the restaurant market, or do you think it's just something that caught on because it's a decent sort of tagline?
I would lean towards the latter. I mean, I think what you have to you got to think historically about farms, and so farm to table is a concept for a bunch of people who have disposable income that can go out to a restaurant and be like, oh, we're eating farm to table. But historically, most farmers could not afford to eat the things they grew on their farm because everything had to be sold to make the profit to bring in whatever else they were going to do. So it was, it was always rare for someone who had a pig. People who have pigs don't eat pig every week. It's still like, no, we have to sell the pigs. And maybe luckily we'll have some pigs. So I think the farm to table, although it's a beautiful sentiment, and we want people to be connected and understand where their food comes from. I think that's the heart of what that's about. Where does the food come from? Do you understand how much work how much work goes into, raising and maintaining a pig and feeding the pig rather than crap food so that it tastes better? And Anthony's pigs, I mean, he's spent all the years we've been together, 14 years of, doing hybrids with these different pigs to get the pig that is perfectly, fatty and perfectly meaty and has this texture that he wants. So it's a lot of work. So I think it's more important. The farm to table movement is more important for people to just stop and take a look at, where did this food come from? How did it get here? It's not, hermetically sealed in a plastic wrap in a grocery store. It's something that someone carefully and beautifully, if you want to think about the aesthetics of farming, brought to that table.
Yeah. And I think that's an excellent answer to it. I don't really have a follow-up for that. But yeah. All right. So George, kind of bringing us into sort of a closing point. I really just have two questions that I really just want to touch on. Okay. So George Contini, what was the drive? That's how you know this is the big moment.
It's the big moment. It is. It is.
So, okay. So what would you say was the driving force that got George Contini started on the path that he is on now? And what is the driving force for you? What was the driving force for you at the start of your career versus what is the driving force of your career now? If it has changed, what do you think was the biggest cause of that change? As we kind of wind things down.
Wow. Okay. All right. A driving for. Okay. Well, I mean, I wouldn't say I knew this at the time, but in retrospect, what has driven me through my life is what I've come to recognize as my creative urge. Like, I need to be part of a creative act. And it doesn't necessarily always mean I have to be acting. I can be directing. I can be writing. I can be singing. I can be throwing pig food into the pigs. I mean, I just want to feel like I'm making something. And I think that from being a young child, from those early days of, when I think about, playing the bunny in Little Red Riding Hood in kindergarten, it's like, even from that moment, it wasn't for me about getting in front of an audience, because in some ways I was terrified. It was about feeling the energy of everyone in the room around that creative act. And so then that led, as I grew older, I started to understand that feeling was about collaboration. And so that what drove me was not being the star of a show or standing on a stage and having everyone applaud. It was looking around, looking at everyone's faces in the cast on stage while I was on them, and understanding the connection that was going on between all of us, and understanding the connection of the people backstage who were running the show, and the designers, and everyone who had brought the show to life. That to me was what kept me going. And then if there were changes along the way, it was becoming aware of the way in which that creative urge, for whatever better term, used for good, is that like the moments in my life, and it's interesting. The did this for me recently passed away of COVID, and it was kind of devastating. When one of my first professional productions back in the 80s was with a theater in Indianapolis called the Phoenix Theater, and the director there, Brian Fonseca, we were doing a play As Is, which was about the AIDS crisis at the time, and it was one of the first plays about that. And I remember after the opening night of that show, because people in the audience were there had been no outlet for the grief and the anger around the disease, and the people in the audience were so moved, and just an amazing experience. And I remember going home that night and sitting in my bedroom and thinking, this is going to change how I feel about theater for the rest of my life. That from now on, I only want to do a play if I feel like it's going to have some sort of a social impact. And so it really kind of turned me in a direction which led me into things like queer theater and gay theater, and really concentrated my focus for a long time. And then getting into education is funny, because I reconnected with this director a few months ago out of the blue when I was in Miami, and I was working with a director who I'd worked with on a number of shows. And he, one night, right before I went on stage, I had been teaching during the day at a grade school. I was doing an artist in residence program. And I remember coming backstage, and he asked me, "So how was your day?" And I went into this long monologue about all the things I had done with my students and what an amazing day it was, and blah, 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 blah. And Juan, his name is Juan Sejas, he got really quiet after I finished. I'll always remember this moment. And he looked at me and he said, George, I've directed you in 3 shows and I've known you for 10 years and I've never seen you as happy as when you're talking about teaching. And it was like this moment for me, like, wow, you're absolutely right. And it was literally at that I was like, I'm going to go back and get my MFA and I'm going to teach. And Juan, who literally never knew this, out of the blue, found me online about a month ago, email, and he was like, hey, George Contini, it's amazing. I found you, blah, 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 blah. And we started going back and forth and just kind of reminiscing. And I relayed that story to him. And I said, I don't know if you realize how you changed my life. And for him, that he was like, that just knowing that made his day. Like, that was like, it's all worth it if you can touch someone like that. And he's like, I know that's how you feel teaching. And I'm like, yeah, I do. You know, it really does. It's a good feeling to walk away feeling like you've touched somebody. So yeah, so it changes if you go on a journey, and it's a lovely thing.
Yeah.
And something, yeah. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I love that. So, George, we've been all around the world with this conversation. So, last question. You know, there are a lot of people who watch the show, a lot of my friends from back home and very far south Georgia, a bunch of people who are in high school, various stages of life, and a lot of them have an interest or a love for theater. So if you could have one thing to say for that person who really does enjoy theater, but they don't know if they want to pursue it fully, what's your one piece of advice for that person with what to do next?
So they don't know if they want to pursue it fully or that because I would say
they don't know if they can.
All right. Well, I would say what's important to realize is that it's okay if you don't. If you are joy out whatever form of creativity you're doing, if you're working, because I'll tell you, I truly believe that community theaters are the heart of theater in this country. I would not have the knowledge I know in those early years of being a young kid if we had not had community theater in my little town in Ohio in Amish country. If I would never have been introduced to so many things keeps us alive. So I don't think there's anything wrong with having theater as a hobby. So and I think part of that, going back to the whole question of self-worth that we talked about earlier, that, you know, the arts and theater are not seen as necessarily being valued in our society. And so then the question arises of, well, if I want to do this, if I want to keep doing this, should I be doing it as a profession? You don't have to. You really don't have to. It's about the joy. And so I would first say, don't feel like you have to push yourself. But then if you do decide, okay, I'm going to go into this, it's a matter of out what you want means for you in that regard. Does success star of a huge action movie, or success mean just being part of act or a collaboration? If you're, I truly believe artists at their heart are very similar to people on a religious quest. There's a calling. You get a calling to it. It's all you want to do. You feel like it's the reason you were put on this earth, that it brings you joy and makes you feel connected. So if that's what's driving you, be focused on that. Don't necessarily be focused on, oh, I'm not making any money at this, I'm a failure. That's a whole different way of rating yourself. If you're getting the joy creative act, that's the most important thing, I think, if that makes any sense.
I think it makes perfect sense, George. And yeah, no, I think that's a perfect note to kind of wrap this discussion in a nice little bow. Well, George, seriously, I cannot thank you enough for being on tonight. Did you have a good time?
I had a great time, and I am so blown away, Doug, by what you are doing with it. I put for everyone in that acting on camera class who guilted me into coming onto this show.
Yeah.
I'm challenging all the other faculty members, and I'm challenging all the other students to be a guest on Tea with Doug.
Hey, let's do it. Let's do it.
Everyone needs to spill the tea with you, and I think that it's a very important thing. So keep going. I think it's awesome.
Well, thank you very much. Also, thank you to Anthony for some amazing insight. Yes. Yeah, everyone who is watching, thank you so much. If you're in the chat, thank you so much. Please keep an eye out for everything Viter Media has going on. New episodes of Saying the Skene every Wednesday. But yeah, until next week, I'm Doug Gooden. He's George Contini, and this has been the Tea.
Bye.
Y'all have a great week.